on that level, and I got a good lesson of it. And it's a wonderful story. We had ducks that would frequent pathways a few years ago. So we had duck crossing signs, and we always made sure everybody knew, watch out for the ducks. One day, Deborah decides to take a container of water. Because there's no water around, there's no reason for the ducks to be there. As she takes a container of water, she goes out the front door, she puts it off to the side. And I'm watching her do it, just soaking it in. She said, well, it only makes sense they're ducks. This is the middle of landlocked South County. Yeah. She goes, so I'm going to handle this like an ascended master would handle it. How's that, Deborah? I'm going to put the water here for them. They know this is a safe place. They know they've got what they need. If they find the water, excellent. If they don't, excellent. She turns and looks at me, she said, that's the idea of ascended masters. They put the teachings out there. But it's up to the individual to take it in and work with it. Profound. You know, here on physical earth, we're in the middle. And she wouldn't have it any other way. That's why she did what she did. Love you lots, honey. See you soon.
Thank you, Reverend Bill. At this time, I'd like to invite up a very dear friend of Deborah's, Mr. Bill Scott.
Hi, my name is Bill Scott. Some of you here know me, most of you probably don't. I'm going to talk about Deborah a little bit here. As soon as I get my notes to come up. Put my eyes on. On Deborah's last day at the hospital, there was a group of people there who she had said she wanted to see for a last farewell. Her plan was to go home, lie in her Four Seasons room, and wait for graduation day as she called it. She let it be known that once she went home, she was not going to be taking visitors. And I can certainly understand that, because the end of life is usually a messy, unpleasant thing. That day at the hospital, I went to her bedside, gave her a hug and a kiss, told her I loved her, and I tried to hide my shock at how frail she had become. It was a short, somewhat formal visit, there being a lot of other people there. And I left thinking that that would be the last time I'd see her on this earth. A week or so later, I got a call from Ken, saying she wanted to see me. I was being summoned. I see other people understand that. My thought was that she probably had something she wanted me to do. And that thought was immediately followed by the idea that she wanted me to speak in her memorial. I went to visit her. I sat close to her bed and held her hand. And we talked for a long time about the old days, because I've known her for a long time, and things we had done together and people we had known. And when I left, she hadn't asked me to do a damn thing. And yet here I am. I've been trying to remember the first time I met her, but it's too long ago and my memory isn't that good. There was a period where she didn't have a store. She sold books out of her house on McDonald Street. You had to make an appointment. And she worked the psychic fairs around town. And I'm sure the first time I actually met her was at one of those psychic fairs. But that was not the first time I had encountered her. When I first encountered her, At first, she was not called Deborah Bourbon. She was called Debbie Letter by people who knew her. And she was not really a person when I first encountered her. She was a legend. I've been involved in magic for 40 years, man and boy. When I first started, the term New Age studies didn't exist. We called it the occult. And back in those days, magicians and mystics and witches and whatever were pretty hard to come by. And books worth reading anyway were very hard to come by. And the first place that I met, the context in which I met Deborah was purchasing books, as I'm sure is the case with many people here. It was a different landscape then. There weren't many places. There was the old alchemist shop out in Overland, where Al, the proprietor, used to sneak out the back door, come around the block, so he could stand with the good Christians out front who were singing hymns in protest of his existence. I asked him about that once. He said, I like to sing. There was Finley's Products up on Delmar, across the street from where the Moonrise Hotel is now, where there were dark rumors of voodoo rituals and chicken sacrifice in the basement. And there was Helios Books out at, also on Delmar, out by Hanley. In all these places, when I got there, and thinking how cool and clever a person I was to have found this place, Debbie Letter had been there before me. And she had left an impression. In those days, tales of Debbie were full of adventure, short on details. She was known to be smart and sexy, fearless and capable. Most of the people that spoke about her spoke of a combination of awe and admiration, and just a little bit of fear. It was said that she did not suffer fools gladly, that she was supremely willful. She was a tester of limits, and most of all, she was not to be trifled with. Helios Books, which was a place that was revealed to me through one of those bizarre twists of fate that make you think the gods really are interested in you, was where I met Bob Lewis, who became my magical teacher, my mentor. Bob was, I wish I knew how to get a hold of him now. He was a wonderful person, a man of encyclopedic knowledge. He could quote medieval grimoires from memory. He had gotten most of his magical training and virtually all his practical experience in a magical group that also included Debbie Letter. He also spoke of her with just a little bit of fear. That group included Bob North, and if you want to know how impressive it was that he was afraid of Deborah, I'd read some of Bob's books. At Helios there, we put together a Golden Dawn group. It was my first great magical adventure. Another member of that group was Faith Ann Robinson. I'm sure many people here are going to remember. She was Deborah's cousin. She also had some tales to tell. During this time, I bought most of my magical books at Helios. I was meeting there once a week. But Bob was always a better magician than he was a businessman, and he had a tendency to give books away to people he thought needed them. So every now and then he'd be looking for something, and he wouldn't have it, and he would always give you Deb's phone number and call her. My real relationship with Debbie Letter who would by then become Debbie Berger, was after Helios closed and the old pathways opened over in Watson. It pretty quickly became my favorite place to hang out. Like everyone, I loved talking to Deborah, and I got to know everybody who worked there. Eventually, some of my friends that started going there because I introduced them to the place, started working there. In those days, Debbie was curvy and auburn hair. She was a woman. Girl could stop conversation with a shift of her hip. We really took a like to each other pretty quickly. We had a lot of common interests. We both liked to travel. We're both nuts for the national parks. We both had interest in old Al Crowley, and we both thought that Bob Dylan was the only true poet laureate this country ever produced. At the old store, I used to teach a few classes. Crowley and Dr. D and magical tools and Bush League astrology and tarot. The classes usually ran late because I like to talk. And after the classes were over, we would often go over to Malone's or Applebee's or someplace, have a few beers, grab a little bit of food. Sometimes we would end up over at Deborah's house and had a few more beers. I always had to stop on the way to buy a beer. Deborah had many fine qualities. She had appalling taste in beer. We would go over there and sit in the kitchen and, drink some beer, pet Anubis, her dog. She had one of the CD players where it had 5 or so CDs you could put in it. It was filled with Bob Dylan records. The same Bob Dylan records. Over and over again. She loved him. She would sing along with him. One year at Christmas, I bought her some new Bob Dylan CDs. She loaded them into the machine, and we listened to them, and she said they were very nice. And the next time I came over, of course, the old ones were better. The first time I ever went to her house was an occasion like that. We had a few beers out. We went to her house and had a few more. It was the first time I'd been there. I was unfamiliar with the house. We were sitting in the kitchen, which was not that well lit. And we'd been sitting there drinking beers, and after a few beers, you have to go to the restroom. I asked her where the restroom was, and she pointed to the door right behind me. And I stood up and went in that direction, and was immediately frozen by the giant python in the corner. Somehow I had missed that. It was Apep, her pet python, who was behind glass and everything, but we had a few beers, you can still be kind of freaked out by it. I was half a minute to the bathroom. Another thing about that house was a phenomenon that I came to refer to as them ones. After a piece of dialogue in an H.P. Lovecraft story, Debbie believed that there were spirits, ghosts, that on occasion of their choosing would come through one wall of the basement, walk across the basement, and exit out the other wall. She didn't think they were malevolent or evil. They were just doing what they were doing. And I was kind of a skeptic, and I scoffed at that kind of stuff. So one day she made me a very simple proposition. She said, well, there's a chair in the basement. Go sit down there for an hour. I laughed my Hoti laugh. And I went downstairs and I turned the chair in the direction from which the specter would come. I sat in the chair comfortably, I opened my book and I started to read. I never saw any ghost, but I'm going to tell you, about 20 minutes later, I could no more sit in that basement than I could sit in a bonfire. And I came upstairs, And before I could say anything, Debbie looked at me with that tilted head, eyes half closed, smile, and she said, "I told you." She and I, we worked together in a couple of different magical groups in the 90s. She was always clever and inventive. She could be really intimidating in a magical circle if she was carrying something sharp. She often scared the new people. After the store moved to its current location, her interests became more Eastern and mystical. Mine remained pretty much Western and magical. I never taught any classes at the new store. She was furiously busy, running the business, teaching an insane amount of classes. I didn't see her as much, but I always made it a point to come by the store, pick up my supplies, and mostly to see her. She always greeted me with that big smile, a hug and a kiss. And I could see the number of people coming through the store. People who came in troubled and searching, and who often found help and guidance, sometimes maybe even salvation. The kind of magic that I studied and that I do has at its core something called the great work. The great work is the old metaphor of turning lead into gold. Lead is you. It's the you of circumstance and birth and genetics. The gold is also you. It's the gold. It's the you that has evolved consciously, intentionally, become more than what you were. When I watched Deborah at the new store, and I watched the people that came in, I saw that she had found her way to the great work. Because the true essence of the great work is that as you evolve yourself, as you raise yourself, since there is no difference between you and the world, you also raise the world. You improve the world. Without question, she did that. When I heard she was sick, I was shocked and horrified, and I cussed out loud for a real long time. I watched her go from being strong and vivacious to frail and delicate. Auburn hair turned snowy white. I watched a woman who had once been firm and powerful become kind of shaky and weak. She was always tired. After a while, it became an event for her to just be at the store. Then finally she went to the hospital, and then she went home. And I didn't think I would see her again, but as I said, I did. While she was at her home there, I went to visit her once a week or so. She was so weak, so tired. I would sit close to her and hold her hand. We talked a lot about the old days, old people.